to week 7 of DMD100, Intro to Digital Media Design. All right, this week let's take a look at the week 7 module. We'll go to the week 7 overview. Okay, so our main theme this week is one of those 8 tenets of visual literacy that we're covering this semester. This week it is pictograms and iconography. So in a minute we're going to talk about we're going to do sort of an overview of what pictograms and iconography are and show some examples and sort of how they function in the real world. Prior to that, you're going to want to consume the following here, the read, view, listen, and do this week. This is sort of your textbook reading this week. There's this great video here, Symbols, Values, and Norms, which talks about sort of societal expectations and how different visual representations and actions play into what we all consider to be sort of symbols, values, and norms, and sort of how to break those out from a sociological point of view. It does touch a little bit on pictograms and iconography, but it's more about sort of general agreed upon communicative methods in society. So check that out. And then that leads directly into this video here, The Birth of Writing, Pictographs in a Cave, which talks about the origins of pictograms. Pictograms are, while they are simplistic images, they are meant to be communicative. They were around longer than written language. So visual language has been around longer than written language as a means of communication. And so this is a really short video that talks about sort of the birth of writing in the form of pictographs, which eventually became pictograms, and then iconography, and how we are all sort of familiar with them in society. Then, of course, continue on with this lecture here, and we will get into some examples of pictograms in sort of current times. And then, once you have done all that, you are ready to roll to hop into this week's discussion board 2, Pictograms, Icons, and Society. The specific theme on the discussion that you are to take part in this week is the history of male and female restroom pictograms. This is a discussion about sort of the history of pictograms in more modern times in the 20th century, starting with the International Pictogram System that began in Vienna in 1924. And so you can read a little bit about that here. It's specifically referred to as the isotype pictorial language. And from there came a variety of standardized pictograms that are used in society, specifically, of course, the male and female restroom pictograms, as well as many others. And then the conversation focuses more on archetypes in terms of gender and representational gender, and also has a conversation about alternative representations for the use of restrooms and how the system has evolved from the isotype system from the 1920s and 1930s through today, and offers up some alternatives based on this designer's ideas. This guy named Chris Gall in 2019, he came up with an alternative representation that sort of takes the whole representation of public restrooms outside of the gender representation, the gender pictograms, and brings it into more of a practical representation revolving around things like hand washing. And anyway, once you've read through all that and your head is all full of that history of pictographs and pictograms and all of these other things, then you can dive into the discussion itself. There are 3 things you have to do here in the discussion. Of course, the first one is to read all that information that we just talked about and consider your own experiences, and then answer the prompt that is given here. Once you have put in a minimum of 250 words of your own thoughtful and intelligent answer, then come back and check out a couple of your classmates' responses and choose 2 classmates that you want to respond to their post. Give them some good feedback and get the conversation rolling. Basic discussion guidelines are at the bottom. Now you have all week to work on all of this, right? All week you have to not only finish this lecture that you're listening to right now, but watch these 2 videos and then participate in the discussion board. That is your number 1 main priority this week, is to sort of submerge yourself into this world of pictograms and iconography through these various things. Nothing else is due this week other than the discussion board. No projects are due this week, and there's no specific homework this week. So this is a self-contained week all about pictograms and iconography. So set aside time this week to really spend some time on this and participate fully in a discussion. And other than that, you'll be all set. All right, so let's dive into an exploration of some more current uses of pictograms and icons. Okay, so of course here's a collection of pictograms that should be fairly easy to understand, but some of them are a little confusing. Now the reason I like to show these is because a couple of things. Number one, I like to highlight that making a good communicative pictogram that tells the story you want it to tell is not really that easy. Number one, it has to be simple. It has to work in one color or two colors. Sure, pictograms can be more colorful than that, but at their core, they should be really simple. And so if they can work in black and white like these do, then they're successful pictograms. The other thing is they can't have too much detail, because then they go from being pictograms to being illustrations, and you want to sort of hover over that line between too much detail and not enough detail. You don't want to make an illustration, you want to make a pictogram. So if we look at this first pictogram, look at it for a second and think about what that is. Now you might look at it and think, oh, well, that's 3 tenths, and it is 3 tenths, right? But what type of tenths? Really, what is the larger story this is telling you? Objectively and really practically, you could say, sure, it's 3 tenths. There's a tenth in the front, and there's 2 tenths in the back, and they each have a little banner or a flag at the top of them. And the one in the front has some stripes on it, and the 2 in the back are silhouetted in black. Okay, that is entirely accurate. There's nothing wrong with that description. However, there is a larger narrative, a larger story that's trying to be told here. What would that be? Well, it's the circus, right? Because these are specific types of tents. They are circus tents. You can tell that due to their shape, due to their size. Look how big the opening is in the front, right? The stripes running up it and the banners at the top. All of those basic visual choices tell you circus, right? Now, if we look at this next one, again, you could say, well, it's a drum or a bongo next to a guitar. Okay, that's 100% accurate. However, what's the bigger story that's being told here? Well, the bigger story is that this is acoustic music, right? This is an acoustic guitar. This is not a drum set, it's a single drum, and so you can imagine 2 people playing either folk music or traditional Latin music or something that would require a acoustic guitar and a single drum. So we're not going to be playing heavy metal music with these particular instruments, right? We're not going to be playing techno music with these instruments. So you can ascertain by what's being shown in the pictogram what the bigger story is. And we should be able to do it quickly, right? Okay, this one here, it's a microphone. There's music going on. Sure, absolutely. But what's the bigger story? Is it karaoke maybe? Is it some sort of a singer? I'm going to go with karaoke because not only do we get the microphone, but we get the musical notes, but we also get these non-musical symbols like the square and the plus symbol and whatnot, which tells me that there's some digitation or data going on, which reminds me of karaoke. So maybe that's what that is. Now, the sort of the polar opposite of these instruments, we get these instruments. Drum and guitar, drum and guitar. Yeah, so they're the same thing, right? No, they're not the same thing. This, as we said, is acoustic music, maybe folk music. But this one here is definitely a different type of music based on the shape of the guitar and the fact that it's a full drum set as opposed to just a single drum. Well, tells you this is electric music, right? In fact, more specifically, it's probably hard rock music because that shape of the guitar is very much hard rock, right? Rock and roll, hard rock, hair metal, that kind of music. So you can tell the story by making a couple of different choices in how you depict the pictogram. Okay, so I'm going to stop talking for a second and just have you kind of go through and look at these other ones and see if you can figure out not only what the item is that's being shown, but what is the story it's trying to tell? What is the narrative? Go ahead, take a look. Okay, so hopefully you paused it, you took a look, and started thinking about it. And so again, you could say, well, this is a record player, sure, but what is the story it's telling you? This is kind of a media player, this is an amplifier, and so on and so forth. Now, I'm not saying that all of these are clear. Normally when I show these to students, people have a difficult time figuring out what this is, and we have a very difficult time figuring out what this is. It's a stack of money, but there's a musical note on it, so what does that mean? This is definitely a hat of some kind, but what's the story that it's trying to tell? So sometimes you can successfully create a pictogram to describe the item, but maybe you don't do such a good job telling the story. A successful pictogram tells the story as well as depicts the item, just like the ones we looked up here. Now, the other thing I want to talk about pictograms is sometimes they get frozen in time, and they are used to represent an object or concept that, while the modern version of that object has maybe changed, the concept has stayed the same, and so we sort of universally as a society understand that it is what it says that it is. For example, this one in the lower left corner, that's a television, right? That is an old-fashioned furniture-like piece of television that has legs, an antenna on top, and a big heavy case. I'm pretty sure most people these days do not own a television that looks like that. In fact, televisions these days just look like black rectangles, right? And you probably have them hanging on your wall or sitting on top of a counter or a piece of furniture. And so this depiction of a television doesn't resemble the reality of a television anymore, but it is a universally recognized symbol for television. And so if you were to put this anywhere, most people would think, oh, television, even though they probably don't own a television like that. In fact, I would hazard a guess that many of you have never even seen a television like this in person. And yet you somehow subconsciously understand that that's a television. So sometimes good pictograms get frozen in time because they're just such a good depiction of a particular item or concept that you don't actually have to update it. Okay, next we have these pictograms here. So these here are Olympic pictograms, right? So the Olympics, which happens every 4 years, whether it's the Winter Olympics or the Summer Olympics, one of the things they do in terms of their visual representation is they create a set of pictograms. They hire an artist or a team of artists or a design company or whatever to design a set of pictograms that represent all the various sports. Now, this here is for the Paralympics specifically, so the Special Olympics. And so this was in Rio de Janeiro in 2016, and these are the pictograms that were used for the Paralympics that year. And so you can see going through it that it depicts the different types of sports. Now, these are used within the Olympic Village for wayfinding and signage, as well as other sorts of communications like flyers and brochures and whatnot on their website, as well as many other places. So these pictograms get a lot of use, right? They're all over the place. But just look through them and take a look at the depiction of the different sports. But really what I want you to look at here, more so than the last group of pictograms we looked at, is the style, right? Because these definitely are not just depicting the sport in question, but also are drawn, are designed in a way that have a very specific artistic style, right? And so we talked about artistic interpretation when we went over the different tenets of visual literacy. And so here we have the idea of pictograms and icons intersecting with the idea of artistic interpretation, because not only are these meant to tell you what sport's going on, but also to do so in a way that has some flair, some personality, some pizzazz, right? Okay, so let's pause here and we'll play a little game, and we are going to see if you guys can recognize this batch of Olympic pictograms. Now, this is from a different Olympics. The previous one, of course, was from the Paralympics 2016 in Rio. I don't know exactly where these are from. I actually kind of forget. But these were used in a different Olympics in recent history, and depicts, of course, different sports. Now, again, remember, these are used for signage and wayfinding and brochures and all sorts of other advertising and marketing purposes, so that when people are at the Olympic Village, they can find their way around. So let's say you have tickets to go see, the ice skating, and you want to go to the part of the Olympic Village where it is, you have to follow the signs, right? So these should be pretty clear, telling you what sport is happening. Now, we talked about artistic style in the last one. Take a look at the way this one is done, right? The line weights, the way the characters, the figures are represented. But the main thing is here is, can you recognize the different sports? So let's take a look. I'm going to leave this up on the screen for a second. You can pause, obviously, and try to see how many of them you can name. Okay, so let's show you what the answers were. All right, how many did you get right? Were you close on some of them? Did you get all of them? Some of them are very specific, right? Different types. Like if you look down here, we've got, 5 different types of snowboarding. Each one has a specific subtitle to it, so maybe that might be too much for you to get. But either way, you get the idea. Okay, the last thing I'm going to look at here is a set of pictograms that were developed for a spa of some kind over in Europe. I don't know exactly where. And so if you look at the application of these pictograms, as well as the signage system that goes along with it, you can see that it's very dependent on color coding, on specific line weights, some typography, but also these very specific pictograms where they sort of dedicated themselves to using the exact same line weight throughout all of the pictograms. So it's a very minimalistic kind of perspective on it, but I think it works pretty well, but there are some shortcomings. So if we look at the main signage here for this spa, you can see that everything in green is for fitness and gymnasium, everything in blue is for the swimming pool, and everything in red is for bowling. I don't know why bowling gets its own specific thing. Apparently they really like bowling at this spa. And then white is just information. But notice that aside from the color coding, there's also a specific style of line that is attributed to these different areas in the spa. A straight line leads you to where the bowling happens. A angular line leads you to where the fitness and gym happens. And of course, the curved, wavy line leads you to the swimming pool. And then if you see this photograph of the hallway, you can see that if you follow the blue wall, it takes you down towards the pool. Follow the blue wavy line. You get the red wall with the arrows. Should take us to the bowling area, but also if you look at these icons, we can see some other things. There's a bowling pin, but there's also a drink, so maybe we can get some refreshments down there too. And again, here's an example of the green, taking us to the fitness and gymnasium area with that angular line and some weights. Here's another shot of the hallway. Some different ones. Now, I think that as much as I love this system that they came up with, using these icons and pictograms, it does get a little confusing because the reliance on both the different line styles and the color coding kind of overlaps a little bit. So green is for the gymnasium and fitness, but they're putting it on a blue wall because it's also leading to the pool area. So maybe the color coding plus the line styles is maybe a little much, but either way, you get the idea. And then here's another close-up of one of the icons. Now here's the entire set of icons, starting with a set of arrows, some typical symbols where you can travel here, you can't travel here. Here we have the male and female gender symbols that are part of our discussion this week. Here we have a handicap symbol. This is for a spa. An exit internally and an exit externally, right, if you're going from one room to the next or if you're leaving the building completely. Here we have a hot stone massage. This is more of a typical massage. This is a hanger with a dress on it and a hanger with a shirt on it. I'm not exactly sure what it denotes. This is for the pool, bowling, and so most of these are pretty self-explanatory. But as we get down here to the lower part of the icon set, it gets a little fuzzy, right? So this is probably Red Cross or Medic or something like that. Okay. Paperclip, maybe business center. Coffee cup, so maybe that's a coffee shop. Hanger, maybe a dry cleaners or a coat closet. This is easy. Smoking, no smoking. Showers, perhaps. That makes sense. This is no outdoor shoes, indoor shoes only, so rubber-soled sneakers. This is probably for the basketball court or something. You don't want to be scuffing up the nice floor. So that's clearly a wrench of some kind, but what story is it telling us? This is a skull and crossbones of some kind, but what story is it telling us? I don't know exactly. That's a fire extinguisher. That's a fire hose. This is the one that stumps everybody who looks at this. What is this? It looks like a rake and a pail, but I'm not exactly sure what it is and what would that have to do with a spa. This looks like a scientific beaker of some kind or a vial, but why would that be in a spa? This, nobody has any idea what this is. Every time I show this one to students, nobody can figure out what this is. Could be a cheeseburger? No, probably not. I don't know what it is. And again, I don't even know what this is. It's some kind of fan ventilation system. So as we've seen with a lot of these examples, it's easy to get lost in your sort of pictogram vocabulary, right? A lot of them are really effective. They do a great job of telling the story. They're visually engaging. They're visually consistent. And then sometimes they're a little fuzzy. Anyway, you get the idea. All right, so now you're going to go on and, like this photo shows, you're going to engage in our second discussion board talking about the history of and practicality of the male and female gender symbols for bathroom usage. So go check those out